If you've ever made the drive between Southern California and Las Vegas, you've passed this sign, Zzyzx Road. It sits right off Interstate 15, about 7 miles south of a little town called Baker. It's one of those signs you notice for half a second and then forget, a strange cluster of letters that doesn't look like it should be a word at all. Millions of people see it every year. Almost none of them take the exit. I did, and a few miles down that road, in the middle of the Mojave Desert, there are palm trees and buildings and a lake that has no business existing out here. It looks like an oasis. It looks like somewhere you'd go to get well, but everything you're about to see was built on a lie. The man who created this place wasn't a doctor. The healing springs he was famous for were fake. He didn't even own the land. And for 30 years, he convinced the entire country to mail him money for it. This is the story of Zzyzx, and it's stranger than the name. Before we go any further, that name. Most locals say it Zzyzx, rhyming with Isaacs, but you'll hear people argue about it. The truth is, it was never a real word to begin with. Keep that in the back of your mind. The name is the first clue that everything out here was invented by one man, exactly the way he wanted it. Let's take the exit. The road runs quiet once you leave the freeway behind. About 95% of it is paved. There's just one short stretch, a couple hundred feet, where the pavement drops away and you're driving across the bare crust of a dry lake bed. And as you cross it, you cross a line on the map, too. All of this land is inside the Mojave National Preserve now, administered by the National Park Service. That detail is going to matter later, so hold on to it. The reason anyone has ever come to this spot, the reason there's anything here at all, is water. Out in the desert, nothing is more important. There's a natural spring here, and it has drawn people for a very long time. The first Americans to reach it called it Soda Springs, and human beings have been living around it for something like 11,000 years. In more recent history, this was home to the Mojave, the Serrano, and the Southern Paiute. The first European to see it was a Spanish missionary named Francisco Garces, back in the 1770s. About 50 years after that, the American explorer Jedediah Smith passed through. Out past the buildings is Soda Lake, the dry, pale basin you crossed on the way in. It's the end of the line for the Mojave River, and it's what's called a closed basin. Water flows in, but it never flows out. It just evaporates, and every time it does, it leaves its minerals behind. Thousands of years of that process laid down these blinding white layers of salt. Long ago, this basin actually held a real lake, one geologists call Lake Mojave, that filled and dried up more than once before, finally vanishing about 8,000 years ago. Those dunes shimmering on the far side have a name too, the Devil's Playground. By the 1850s, this little spring had become an important stop on the Mojave Road, a rugged trail connecting the Colorado River to Southern California. It was harsh country and dangerous, so an Army officer named James Henry Carleton ordered a small stone fortification built near the water. It was called Hancock Redoubt. It wasn't really a fort. It was more of a hardened camp, a low wall of desert rock where travelers could take cover if they had to. Remember that old fort? A century later, a con man is going to build his church right on top of it and get himself in trouble for it. There's one more piece of history out here before we get to him, and it's easy to miss. In 1907, a railroad reached Soda Springs, the Tonopah and Tidewater. It was an ambitious line, meant to connect the mining boomtowns of Nevada down to the bigger networks in California. But here's the thing, despite the name, the Tonopah and Tidewater never actually reached Tonopah, and it never reached the Tidewater either. It fell short of both. By 1940, the whole line was abandoned. The tracks pulled up and melted down for the war effort. That flat path running out across the dry lake, that was the railroad bed. For everyone who came before, this place was somewhere you passed through on your way to somewhere else. It took one man to decide it should be a destination. That man was Curtis Howe Springer. He arrived in 1944, and depending on who you asked, he was a doctor, a scientist, and a minister. All three or none of them. The honest answer is none of them. Springer had spent years building a following on the radio. first out of Chicago and later Pittsburgh, preaching a simple and appealing idea. Your physical health, your mental health, and your spiritual health were all one thing, and the key to all of it was what you put into your body, which was very convenient because Springer had things to sell you. He claimed degrees he never earned from schools that in some cases didn't exist. Years before he ever set foot in this desert, the medical establishment already had his number. In 1936, the Journal of the American Medical Association ran an article about him titled, plainly, "A Quack and His Nostrums." They noted that a thorough search failed to turn up a single reputable college or university that had ever granted him a degree. None of that slowed him down. By the 1940s, he wanted something bigger than mail-order tonics. He wanted a place, and when he came across this remote spring on the edge of Soda Lake, he saw exactly what he needed: water, sunshine, and isolation. So in 1944, he filed a mining claim on roughly 12,000 acres of federal desert, an enormous stretch of land, miles across, and he started to build. He called it Zzyzx Mineral Springs and Health Resort, and the name, that string of letters that stops you on the highway, was a marketing stunt. He wanted the last word in health, so he invented what he called the last word in the dictionary. That was the trick with Springer. Almost nothing here was what it appeared to be. Here's the dark part. The springs, the whole reason this was a mineral springs health resort, the thing people drove hours to soak in, were fake. There was a real spring here, cold desert water, but Springer installed boilers and heating equipment to warm his pools. Then he presented them to guests as natural, therapeutic hot mineral springs bubbling up from the earth. The healing waters were a stage prop. People came out here to be cured by something that was, quite literally, being heated up behind the scenes. And the resort itself was built by people who had nothing. Springer recruited homeless men off the streets of Los Angeles, Skid Row, and put them to work pouring concrete in the desert heat in exchange for room and board. With that labor, he built something genuinely elaborate. A 60-room hotel, a church, a cross-shaped pool you can still make out from above on a satellite map, a radio studio, mud and mineral baths, a goat farm, a rabbit farm, a power plant, a plant nursery, and a small man-made lake with a boat dock. He even graded his own private airstrip and called it, of course, the Zyport. The main road in, lined with imported trees, he named the Boulevard of Dreams. The pitch matched the ambition. Springer told his radio listeners they could become, in his words, internally, externally, and eternally clean. And he was careful never to charge for his products or his rooms. He asked for donations. "The amount you contribute," he'd say, "is entirely between you and God. Pray earnestly, then mail in your order forms." They mailed them in. At its peak, Springer's program was carried on something like 220 radio stations across the United States, plus another 100 or so overseas. He received so much mail that the little town of Baker had to open a brand new post office just to handle it. He ran a fleet of buses to shuttle guests out from Los Angeles, and he used a sliding scale for lodging. Nobody was turned away, even if they couldn't pay a cent. It made him, by most accounts, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Springer always insisted every dollar went right back into building his desert dream. To understand just how thin the medicine was, you only have to look at what he was actually selling. There was antediluvian tea, marketed as a tonic that could help you live longer. In reality, a mix of laxative herbs and bark. There was Rehib, an antacid that was more or less baking soda, which, to be fair, is the one product on the shelf that sort of worked. There was the Hollywood Pep cocktail, sold as concentrated vital food energy, and most likely made of root vegetables and brown sugar. There was Mohair, a salt and mud treatment you were supposed to rub into your scalp while holding your breath. If your face turned red, well, that just proved it was working. There were Zzyzx crystals, which were desert salt, sold with instructions to think only clean and constructive thoughts while you used them. And his flagship cure-all potions turned out to be, when someone finally checked, celery, carrot, and parsley juice. Honestly, not the worst thing you could drink. Just not the miracle he was charging for. In the end, it wasn't the fake medicine that brought Curtis Springer down. It was the land. A mining claim is a legal right to extract minerals from the ground. It is not a permit to build a 60-room hotel and run a resort. Springer knew this, and when the government came asking, he had an answer ready. He claimed he was mining minerals from the lake bed through solar evaporation. The government didn't buy it. As far as they were concerned, he was simply squatting on federal land, and by the mid-1960s, they had formally declared him a trespasser. The problem was that the Bureau of Land Management had almost no way to actually enforce that. So Zzyzx kept running. Meanwhile, his reputation kept sinking. In 1957, he'd already been fined for building code violations. It turns out you can't just convert an old Army fort into a modern chapel and call it up to code. And in 1969, the American Medical Association gave him the title that stuck for the rest of his life. They stopped calling him a quack and started calling him the King of Quacks. It finally ended in 1974. After 30 years, the government evicted Curtis Springer from the desert he'd claimed. He offered to pay more than $34,000 in back rent to stay. They refused. He was convicted of false advertising for claiming his health foods could cure everything from sore toes to cancer, and for that he served 49 days in jail. And then it was over. The Zzyzx Mineral Springs, the Boulevard of Dreams, the whole invented oasis, it all belonged to the government again. And this is where the story turns, because for all the deception, something real and good was left behind. Around 1955, Springer had dug out that man-made lake and named it Lake Tuende. To stock it, he'd chosen a little fish called the Mojave chub. Now, that fish was in serious trouble. It was native to the Mojave River, but dams, groundwater pumping, and introduced non-native fish had all but wiped it out of its home waters. It was listed as endangered in 1970, and Springer's decorative desert lake, built to impress paying guests, quietly became one of the last safe places on Earth for it. Today, Lake Tuende holds a genetically pure population of Mojave chub, and it's become a source for restoring the species elsewhere, part of a network that now supports something like 18,000 of these fish. A con man's fake lake may have saved a species from going extinct. The site got a second act, too. In 1976, the Bureau of Land Management handed Zzyzx over to the California State University system, and a group of campuses turned it into the Desert Studies Center. Real scientists in the buildings a fraud had raised, doing exactly the kind of legitimate work he'd only ever pretended to do. The dorms are still used. The old dining hall is still used. And in 1994, when the Mojave National Preserve was created, Zzyzx was folded in and protected for good. As for Springer himself, there is one last piece of irony worth sitting with. That antediluvian tea he sold, the one that was supposed to help you live a longer life? Curtis Howe Springer lived to be 88 years old. Whatever he was selling, he clearly wasn't buying it, so that's what's at the end of Zzyzx Road. Not a spa, not a miracle, not the thing on the sign at all, but a monument to one of the strangest cons in American history, sitting quietly in the desert with a rescued fish swimming in a fake lake beside it. Millions of people drive past it every year and never know. Now you do. If you enjoyed this one, do me a favor and give it a thumbs up. It really does help. Consider subscribing because there are a lot more places like this out here waiting to be explored. And I'm curious, have you ever actually taken the Zzyzx exit? Or have you just driven past it like everyone else? Let me know down in the comments, and while you're at it, tell me how you pronounce it. We'll see you next time.